Isn't that special? It is, amen. It's special. It's special to be in God's house tonight, amen. We appreciate you coming out and joining us. Got a good turnout tonight, and we just appreciate what God is doing here. And boy, what a turnout this morning, amen. And we just we appreciate what God's doing here. We praise Him and we honor Him. It is because of Him and that all this is being done. And I'm just, again, as we said this morning, I am just so glad to be here. And I know that you are too, or you wouldn't be here tonight. Amen. There's other play. Do you realize the Cowboys were playing? Yeah. Just thought I'd pass that on to you. Just saying. Yeah, we could put it on the big screen. But we won't, all right? Tonight we're going to continue our look into the life of David. And tonight we're getting into a very touchy situation again in David's life. David's life became a soap opera because of sin. And, you know, it's amazing to me how that, you know, the Word of God tells us that sin is passed on to the third and the fourth generation. And we think when we're in the middle of sin or we're tempted to sin, we have this tendency to think in a very individualistic type attitude that, hey, it only affects me. But we don't stop to think how it affects everyone around us. And not only those who are around us right then, but maybe to the next and the next and the next generation. I was privy to a situation this week and of a situation with a family and just kind of a observer, a bystander, and I saw a father and a daughter, and I just happened to be there, and he came up and he was very, very he was enjoying himself. He was had one or two too many, and he had his daughter with him, and she had her own situations, and I thought, where does it stop? Where do we put a stop to this? You know, you have our children, our grandchildren that coming up behind us, and they get caught in this generational trap. They get caught. Now, we can either have a generational curse that we pass on to our children and grandchildren, or we can pass on a generational blessing. And the thing about it is that we have a little bit of control over that. And you know, there comes a time in the life of a Christian that we have a decision to make. Are we going to continue in this path of destruction, or are we going to leave a destiny behind for our children that they may be blessed? It's up to us. David chose to commit adultery. David chose then to try to hide his act with murder. And David chose to continue to try to cover it, but it was so much in the public eye that everybody knew what was going on. Everybody knew what was happening in the palace. And so, you know, we have a child born, a child dies, and, you know, David, of course, is asking for God's mercy, God's grace, God's forgiveness. And no doubt, like we was talking about this morning, there so many times there's situations in our life that we get to the point where we just have to cry out to God, literally crying out to God, for Him to please give us another opportunity, give us another chance. And like I've said in the past, our God is a God of another chance, another opportunity. Not just a second, not just a third, but another. However, the consequences of our sin and our sins are still visited down the line of inheritance. And so we're seeing that come to pass. We've seen now one of David's sons, he takes advantage sexually of his half-sister, and her whole full-blood brother kills this brother. And now he's run off. His name's Absalom. He's run off to Geshur, to his granddad's house. And now he has been invited to come back home after 2 years. He's been in exile. He's been invited to come back. And so he comes back, but even in coming back, David is not ready yet to come to grips with what's going on in his own home. Now, let me explain this to you. We're not talking about teenagers here. We're talking about full-grown children. And we're talking about those that are of the age that they can make their own decisions now. What do we use for a basis to make decisions in life? What are we using? When we are faced with difficult and harsh decisions, do we flip a coin? Do we go and do we roll the dice? Do we ask a friend? You know, we do that a lot of times. Let me explain something to you. Our past friends probably aren't the best place to go for good Christian counsel. Okay? Just saying. Just letting you know that. If you get in a place where you're beginning to serve God and your life's changing, and you're being kind of drawn away from them, and then something comes along that rocks your boat and rocks your world, they're so quick to give you advice on how that you ought to handle this. And all of a sudden, they all know what God thinks. They all know what God would do. Now, their life's a mess. And their life is in turmoil, but they know exactly what God's thinking. You know, I have this idea that maybe if we know what God's thinking, our life may not be turmoil. Our life may not be a mess if we know so much about what God expects and what God wants. But we take some bad advice sometimes, and as we get into these lessons, we'll find that there's enough bad advice going around in fact, bad advice is what got Absalom into the mess that he's in, and Amnon in the casket. Okay? Sometimes our friend's bad advice is very lethal to us. And so we have Absalom. He's been off in Geshur, and now Joab, the general for David, is now gone up to Geshur to bring him home. Okay, brought him down to the house, but he does not get the opportunity to have an audience with his dad, the king. And so for 2 years, he's down at his house waiting for an opportunity to kind of clear the air. I mean, clear the air? I mean, you killed your brother. The sword, God told David the sword would not depart from his house. Let me ask you a question. Is that what we want for our home? We want a situation like that where sometimes it is almost a paradox, because God blesses our life, and yet we are still dealing with the consequences of our sin. Well, I thought God forgave our sin. He forgives us our sin, but we have put into motion the consequences for our sin. And so before we jump off and just decide to do something because it feels good or it tastes good or it's going to be a fun thing, maybe we might take just a moment to kind of look at what might the end result be and say if we really want to pay that price. Because, see, there's some things about sin that we need to remember, we need to understand. Sin will take you further than you want to go. And sin will keep you longer than you want to stay. And sin will cost you more than you want to pay. And so the dividends for that surrendering to temptation that felt so good or tasted so good, the consequences can be massive. And in David's situation, for one night of lust, this is coming to pass in his family. All of this turmoil. You know what? I am not one that enjoys turmoil. We've had enough at the Wingrove house over the years. I really prefer peace. In fact, there was one time not too many years ago that I just was out by myself, just me and God talking, and I was really like Hezekiah was. I was crying out with tears, God, please bring some peace into our life. And I must say that God honored that request, and he's brought peace. I'm not saying that there's not some little storms that come up every once in a while, but you know what? Me and God can handle those. But it's that continual hurricanes that just are in our life that we want to say, okay, enough. And I'm sure at this point David would like to say, enough. If I could go back and do this all over, I would not do what I did. How many of us have situations in life like that? Oh, man, I wish I'd have never done that. Because now David has all of this. We look at David's life, and I look at the life even around in the Wingrove clan. There's times when the family gets together, and it's just plumb awkward. And it doesn't have to just be the Wingroves. It can be the Smiths and the Joneses and anybody else along the way that because of some things that have gone on inside the family structure, there's some bad feelings, there's some hurt, there's some unresolved issues. And really that's what Absalom's looking at. He said, I want to resolve this one way or another. Let's resolve it. And so here we are. We're in 2 Samuel chapter 14. Where did I pick up? Verse number 23. And so Joab, who's Joab? David's general. He goes down to Geshur. He brings Absalom back to Jerusalem. Go ahead. Next. And the king said, let him turn to his own house. What did the king say? I don't want to see his face. The king, he's still mad. He's still angry. He loves this son, but he's so afraid that his anger is still so hot that he might do something else that would be even more damaging. For just a second, I'd like to speak to parents who still have children that are under your roof. If you, and I've been guilty of this, if you ever discipline out of anger, you are more wrong than your child is. Discipline is not to be done out of anger. David was doing, it's been 2 years. You'd think that his anger would subside a little bit. But look at the immensity of what has taken place. His family is a wreck. One daughter's been violated. One son's died. Another one's been in exile. So there's been no peace in the David household. He said, I don't want to see him. Just tell him to go to his house. Let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his house, and he did not see the king's face. Next verse. But in all Israel, there was none to be so much praised as Absalom, for his beauty from the sole of his foot, even to the top of his head. there was no blemish in him. This was a good-looking rascal. I mean, he was something. He really was. He was a fine physical specimen. He was one of these that would grace the covers of the women's novels, the romance novels. I mean, he was that kind of guy. He had that look about him. He was pretty, but he wasn't just pretty it wasn't a feminine kind of way. He was pretty in a manly kind of way. I mean, he had chiseled features. And just think, he was a Jew. He had that dark hair. You know, and he was one of these that he carried that 5 o'clock shadow that's so fashionable today, right? He's so... Is that what... Was my wife talking in your head back there? I mean, he just wow, you know. But not only did the women see him that way, but the men said, you know what, that rascal's a man's man. I'm telling you, you know, look, he not only was he attractive, but he had a physique about him. I mean, he looked like a bodybuilder. I mean, everything about him, if you were looking for that perfect physical specimen, he was it. And to go along with it, he had this wavy black hair. I am so jealous. The rest of it I can live without. I just would love to have that wavy black hair that's long enough to have a ponytail. I think when I get to heaven, I get a ponytail. If Bailey's not going to give me hers, I'm gonna get one of my own when I get there. Okay? And it says he polled his head. Now I've tried to do that before. You know, where you just run into a pole with your head. That's not it. That's not what he's talking about. No, once a year he went to the barber and they cut his hair. And his hair was so heavy that it weighed a couple of pounds when they cut it off once a year. And it grew so fast that it was just amazing. And 200 shekels after the king's weight. I mean, it was heavy. Some of you ladies that have had long hair, you know, that country singer Crystal Gale, you know, she got that hair that goes down in her boots, you know. Now, that's got to give her a headache. Come on. You know. What? She's very short. How would you know? Moving right along. What difference does it make? It's kind of like, how long are your legs? Well, they reach the ground. You know. Don't help me. Next verse, Becky. And Absalom had 3 sons. What's that tell us? He's not a teenager. He's a grown man. He has a family of his own. He has 3 sons and a daughter. I want you to notice what he names his daughter. What is it? Tamar. Does that conjure up anything in your mind? What was his sister's name that was violated? Tamar. Okay? And so he named his daughter after his sister. Okay? And she was a woman of a fair countenance. Well, yeah, the gene pool's running deep right here. Okay? Daddy's a good-looking guy, and he's got these children that are just good-looking too. And so, beautiful to look upon. I mean, to look at them, from just observing them, you'd think, this is the perfect family. I mean, my goodness. The king's son, a prince. And he has all the credentials to go with it. He has the looks. He has the bearing. And not only that, he has a mind that works, okay? But for 2 full years, he's living in Jerusalem. He doesn't get to see Dad. So, who's his intermediary between he and King David? Joab. Okay? So he sends to Joab. He calls him up on the phone. You know, even back then, caller ID was a wonderful thing. You know, he'd call Joab. Joab said, I ain't talking to him. That's what Alan does to me. I call him up. He goes, I ain't talking to him. Goes to voicemail, you know. So he's not talking to him. He's not even, he's not even giving him the time of day, and he keeps trying to talk to him. He said, I want to. He knows that he doesn't just go into the palace and barge in to see the king. We all think that it'd be great to be a child of the king. I am a child of the king, by the way. Just thought I'd let you know. But I'm talking about an earthly king. They carry a lot of weight. And in most instances, when they are in the process of ruling the nation, their kids are not on the scene. Okay, nannies and other people are taking care of them. I'm sure most of us that were of a certain age, we remember the days. Of course, I was just a kid myself, really was, when John Kennedy was in the presidency, and there's that picture of little John crawling around underneath the desk. I mean, you realize how unnatural that was? I mean, this was the President of the United States, and this was his office, and his son's in there. They're taking care of business of state, and little John's just in there playing around. Why was that? Because you know what? When it all boils down, he was still his daddy, right? And, I really like this new group that's coming up over in England and Great Britain. This new prince that's going to be king one of these days, and his wife, and those two babies they got. They're just kind of like normal folk with a lot of money. They'll never want for anything, but they try to keep it just as real as they can. Well, guess what? It wasn't real in the David household. In fact, that's part of the problem. He has so distanced himself from his children that he has no control over the situation. He's not willing to take responsibility as a parent. He has ushered that off to somebody else. He has problems in the David household. He's not really sure. I'll be honest, I don't think he knows how to handle it. He can handle affairs of state, but he can't apparently handle the estates of house and home. And so he's trying to get in touch with the king through Joab. Joab won't answer him, and so he goes, you know what? Joab's got a barley field down there that's adjacent to mine. I'm going to get his attention. So he sends his servants down there and has them set fire to his barley field. Now, that got Joab's attention. Now, you know what Joab would like to do in this situation? He'd like to go down there and whip the thunder out of Absalom for what he did. But you know what? He can't. You know why? Because that's the king's son. But he does go down there and he said, why did you do that? And you know what Absalom said? Because you ignored me. Yeah, I tried to talk to you, and so I knew this was going to get your attention, so that's why I had it done. It begins to really show us again some of the characteristic traits about Absalom. Absalom doesn't have any real regard for anybody else. Now, he did for his sister, and that was an honor thing. But he doesn't really care who he hurts at this point. Now, I'm going to venture to say that he is probably somewhere 40 years old or more at this point. Maybe not quite that, but I think he's probably somewhere around 40. You'd think that's full grown, right? You ought to be to the point when you're 40 years old that you make pretty sound decisions, and you don't make decisions like this just to hurt somebody to get their attention. But he did. Wherefore am I come from? Why here Absalom said, why did I come home? Why did you bring me home like this? It would have been just as well if I'd have just stayed at Granddad's house. He said, now I want to see the king. I want to see him face to face. If he's still mad at me and he wants to kill me, then let him kill me. What do you think David should have done? As a parent, how would you have handled this situation? Be nice. You know, I have threatened over the years. I've threatened my children before. I said, I tell you what, I brought you in this world, I can take you out, and I'll make another one that looks just like you. But they're all but they're all still alive, and they're all kicking, and they're all doing well. But it's not that I didn't think it. No, take no prisoners. So Joab come to the king, told him, and so the king called for Absalom. He came to the king, and he bowed himself before the king, his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. Now, all is forgiven, right? All is good in the world today. All the planets have now aligned, and everything's okie dokie, right? Not quite. Keep going. Uh-oh. We done changed chapters on you, didn't we? Yeah. I can do that. As time went on, I'm in message, y'all, that would really mess you up. And it came to pass after this that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Absalom now, he feels like he's been forgiven by the king. Look at the time. Okay. And so now he says, I'm going to start building me an entourage. I'm a prince. In fact, by all standards, I really should be the next king. And so I'm going to start preparing things for that. And I'm going to start building me a group, a following. And so he gets him some chariots. He gets him a special chariot, shiny, 57 Chevy type chariot, you know. I'm talking about one of those that wins awards. He got him some black, shiny horses, puts them up there. And when he comes to town, he got 50, is that 50? 50 men that run out in front of him. I'm sure they've got all kinds of trumpets. And they want everybody to know that Absalom's come to town. He wants everybody to know who he is. You know, if you're going to run for office, you need name recognition. And so this guy, not only does he have the looks, not only does he have the bearing, but he also has the brain power, and he has a plan. Now, I'm going to put this all together. I have a short-range plan. I have a long-range plan. My long-range plan is I'm going to rule this place. And you know what? I don't think Dad's doing a very good job. You know, I have a series of lessons that I have taught over the years to young married couples. And I've mentioned it before. I have one lesson that's called Sleeping with the Enemy. And it has to do with parents and their relationship with their children. Your children know more about you than anybody else. You know, it's amazing that when they are little, you are like gods to them. I've got a picture that I have on my iPad, and I'm standing at our dining room window, and I'm on the phone, and my grandson is standing there beside me, and he's just looking up at me. I'm going, whoa, what a responsibility that is. Because he thinks I'm something special. And I don't want to disappoint him. I want him to always think I'm something special. But you know what? I remember when I was raising my children that there was a time when they all thought I was something special. I mean, there's something about that when they say daddy. And, you know, you just kind of stop when they say daddy. And then they grow a little older. They get a little more mature. They get a little independent. And they find out that you don't know nearly as much as what they thought you knew. That you have just dumbed down. How did you ever lived to be this old. It's a miracle because you haven't, I mean, I think every parent that ever had a teenage child has heard this. You don't understand. You don't know. You haven't got a clue what I'm living with. You don't have a clue what I'm going through. You don't, in fact, you don't know nothing. Rocks along, sure enough, you don't know anything. You don't know enough to keep them out of trouble, and they're not smart enough to stay out of trouble. And so time rocks along. And then they get a little older. Somewhere along the way, the paradigm begins to shift, and all of a sudden, it's like you've gone to the University of Higher Learning. They come back and they begin to ask your advice. They're going to, it's not, they don't usually ask your advice about who they're going to marry. You just kind of get that stuff down your throat. I guarantee you, our family structure would have been a whole lot different if I was doing all the planning. I hope my son-in-laws are watching this. I got news for them. About half of them's on waivers right now. But then you get a little older and they begin to really ask your advice. Dad, what do you think about this? Business matters, you know. Buying a house, buying a car, a job. Who am I? I don't know anything. But, you know, and then you kind of cross into a weird place where you actually get to be friends with your children. Now, it's not weird like crazy weird. It's just weird, fun weird. When you really get to be, you know, what you always wanted to be with them, you know, but you had that responsibility of having to raise them. You know, you can't be friends with them when they're little, okay? Because they need a parent. They don't need a friend. But when they get older, it's okay. You can be their friend. And you better hope that as you get older, they don't mind being your caregiver. Because that day may come too. But, you know, sometimes, you know, the wonderful thing about having nothing is your children don't covet it. Okay? But David has something. He has a kingdom. He has a throne. He has power. He has prestige. He has everything that his son wants. Now, you'd think that son could wait. I mean, Daddy's getting old. Daddy's going to die one of these days. I'm gonna say this, and then we're just going to wind this up tonight. But I know of a situation where a friend of mine, a pastor, pastored a church for, I don't know, 40, 45 years. And he had a son. And that son becomes part of the ministry with his dad. And he rocks along there, and he's learning, and, you know, he's learning there's a trade about this. There's things you need to know as a young preacher that's really advantageous to you. Rocked along here, and it doesn't seem like Dad's ever going to step down. And so the time comes when a very similar situation like this arises within the church. And the son actually gives Dad the heave-ho. Now, the son was dashing. The son had personality. The son had every characteristic. The son was a good preacher. The son was a go-getter. I mean, the son could have gone anywhere and started his own church and done well, but he wanted what Dad had. And he literally drove his dad out of the pastorate. And he got what he wanted. And then when he got what he wanted, he realized that wasn't what he wanted. But the damage had been done. The family was a mess. Divorces and relationships torn apart. The church was not what it once was. You know what preachers call that young man? Absalom. He's known far and wide by preachers who knew the situation as Absalom. You know what? That's not a good thing to be called. You know, there is a season to all things. The book of Ecclesiastes says, to everything there is a season. I don't doubt for 1 minute there was coming a day, and probably sooner than that young man realized that Dad would step aside and he would gladly relinquish that pastorate to his son, proudly so. But because of pride and because of greed of power, he caused great destruction. Because he saw something he wanted and he invented a way to get it. Sleeping with the enemy. You know, our children know enough about us to probably wreck us completely. Really? I want to talk to your kids. You leave my kids alone. They're kind of back to the point where they love me. Okay, I don't think they're going to talk to you. Anyhow. But, you know, I guess just to boil it down tonight is the fact that there are repercussions for your choices. And everything that glitters is not gold. And be careful what you ask for, because you might get it. And it might be more than you can handle. And are you ready for the destructive consequences of your actions? In all the end, when it's all said and done, can you look in the mirror and say that you've done that which is right, and that you're still pleased with yourself, and that God's still pleased with you? Let's stand tonight.